Caleb Tucker dropped to his knees in the snow, his frozen hands pressing against the woman's chest. She wasn't breathing. His 7-year-old son Noah stood behind him, silent as always, watching with terrified eyes. "Come on," Caleb growled through clenched teeth, pushing harder. "Don't you dare die on me." 3 miles from shelter, a blizzard closing in, and a stranger whose name he'd never know slipping away in his arms. He didn't know she owned the largest cattle empire in the territory. He only knew he couldn't let her go. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Subscribe and stay with us until the very end. This story will stay with you. The wind hit like a fist. Caleb Tucker pulled his collar higher and squinted through the wall of white. Couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. His mare Bonnie fought against the drifts, her breath coming in thick clouds that vanished into the howling air. Behind him, pressed tight against his back, 7-year-old Noah gripped his father's coat with both hands. The boy hadn't made a sound. Hadn't made a sound in 4 years, but Caleb felt him shivering through the layers of wool. "Almost there, son," Caleb said, though he wasn't sure anymore. Widow's Pass had been a gamble. He'd known it when they left Stillwater 3 hours ago. But the shortcut would save them 2 miles, and 2 miles in this weather meant the difference between getting home and freezing to death on the trail. Now he wondered if he'd made the wrong choice. Bonnie stumbled, and Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. The mare was tired. 12 hours in town, waiting while Caleb shod horses and mended wagon wheels for pennies. 12 hours of Noah sitting quiet in the corner of Harlow's stable, drawing pictures in the dirt with a stick while his father worked. The pay had been 37 cents. Barely enough for flour and salt, but it would keep them fed another week. That was all Caleb allowed himself to think about anymore the next week, the next day, the next hour. Thinking further ahead hurt too much. "Easy, girl," he murmured to Bonnie, patting her neck. "Just a little further." The horse snorted and pressed on. They were maybe 2 miles from the cabin when Caleb saw it. A dark shape against the white, slumped at the base of a twisted pine, half buried in snow. At first he thought it was a fallen branch. Then it moved. No, not moved. Something near it moved. A horse, black as midnight, struggling to stand, its legs folding beneath it. Caleb reined Bonnie to a halt. "Stay put," he said to Noah, and swung down from the saddle. His boots sank deep. The cold bit through his coat, through his shirt, straight into his bones. He pushed forward every step and effort until he reached the dark shape and dropped to his knees. A woman. Her face was pale as wax, her lips blue. Ice clung to her dark hair. She wore a fine coat, too fine for this weather, too fine for these parts, and her gloved hands were curled against her chest like she'd been trying to hold on to the last of her warmth. Caleb pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Nothing. He pressed harder, holding his breath. There. Faint. Barely there. But something. "Ma'am?" He shook her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. He didn't waste time wondering who she was or why she was out here alone. Didn't matter. What mattered was the pulse under his fingers getting weaker by the second. Caleb scooped her up. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe fear made him stronger, and carried her back to Bonnie. The mare shifted nervously, but held steady. Noah's eyes went wide as Caleb lifted the woman into the saddle. "Hold her," Caleb said. "Wrap your arms around her and don't let go." The boy didn't hesitate. His small arms circled the woman's waist, pulling her limp body against his chest. His face was pale, scared, but determined. That was Noah. Silent, but never weak. Caleb climbed up in front of them, both gathered the reins and kicked Bonnie into motion. The black horse whinnied behind them. Caleb looked back. The animal had staggered to its feet, legs trembling, too exhausted to run, but too loyal to stay behind. "Come on then," Caleb muttered. The horse followed. The cabin appeared through the white like a ghost. Caleb had never been so grateful for that ugly little structure, the rough-hewn logs, the crooked chimney, the roof that leaked in 3 places. Right now, it looked like salvation. He dismounted and reached for the woman. Her head lolled against Noah's shoulder. The boy's arms were still locked around her, his small body shaking from cold and effort. "You did good, son," Caleb said, lifting the woman down. "Get the door." Noah slid from the saddle and ran ahead, his boots punching through the snow. He fumbled with the latch. His fingers must have been frozen, but got it open. Warm air rushed out. Caleb carried the woman inside and laid her on the narrow cot near the fireplace. The embers from morning still glowed faintly. He grabbed 2 logs and threw them on, stirring the coals until flames licked up. "Blankets," he said. "Every one we got." Noah moved without being told twice. He gathered the wool blankets from the chest, the patchwork quilt his mother had made, the one Sarah had been working on the night she died, and brought them to Caleb. Caleb pulled off the woman's wet coat, her soaked boots. Her feet were gray. Frostbite. He wrapped them carefully, then piled blankets over her until only her face showed. She still wasn't moving. He filled the kettle with water and set it to boil, then knelt beside the cot and took her hands in his own. They were like ice, stiff and unresponsive. He rubbed them between his palms, trying to force warmth back into her fingers. "Come on," he murmured. "Come on now." Noah crept closer, watching. His eyes asked the question, his voice couldn't. Caleb met his son's gaze. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but we're going to try." The boy nodded and moved to the fireplace. He added kindling carefully, the way Caleb had taught him, building the flames higher. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Caleb lost track. The water boiled. He made tea, just hot water with dried mint, and tried to get some past the woman's lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but a few drops made it through. Her throat moved. Barely. "That's it," Caleb said. "Stay with us." He kept rubbing her hands, kept talking, kept willing her to live. He didn't know why it mattered so much. She was a stranger. Her dying wouldn't change anything about his life, wouldn't make the roof leak less, or put more food in the cupboard. But somewhere deep down in a place he'd locked away 4 years ago, something stirred. He couldn't save Sarah, couldn't save their daughter, little Emma, who'd followed her mother 3 days later. Couldn't save his son's voice, stolen by grief too heavy for a 3-year-old to carry. But maybe he could save this woman. Maybe that would mean something. She woke just after midnight. Caleb was still sitting beside the cot, his back against the wall, when he heard her gasp. Her eyes flew open, sharp gray like winter sky, and she tried to sit up. "Easy." He leaned forward, hands hovering but not touching. "You're safe." She stared at him, wild-eyed, chest heaving. "Where?" "Copper Creek. Few miles south of Stillwater. Found you on the trail." She blinked, processing. Her gaze darted around the cabin, taking in the rough walls. The stone fireplace, the small figure curled up on a pallet near the stove. Noah was asleep. Shadow, the old gray dog Caleb had found half dead in a ditch 2 winters ago, pressed against the boy's side. The woman's breathing slowed. Some of the panic left her eyes. "My horse," she said suddenly. "In the lean-to. Fed and watered. She'll be fine." The woman exhaled, sinking back against the thin pillow. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. "You saved my life," she said finally. Caleb shrugged. "Wasn't going to leave you out there." She turned her head to look at him. Really look. Her eyes traced the lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands, the worn fabric of his shirt. Most men would have. "I ain't most men." Something flickered across her face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think you are." Morning came gray and cold, but the storm had passed. The woman, she still hadn't given her name, was sitting up when Caleb came back from checking the horses. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her hands, wrapped around a cup of hot water, had lost their deathly pallor. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, Shadow's head in his lap. The boy was watching the woman with open curiosity, none of the wariness he usually showed around strangers. "Your son," the woman said as Caleb stamped snow from his boots. "He hasn't spoken." It wasn't a question. Caleb hung his coat on the peg by the door. "No, ma'am, not for 4 years." She didn't ask why. Most people did. They'd pry and prod and offer useless advice as if they knew anything about grief, about the kind of loss that steals a child's voice. But this woman just nodded, her eyes soft, with something that looked like understanding. "What's his name?" "Noah." She looked at the boy. "That's a strong name. Biblical." Noah's eyes met hers. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly the boy smiled. Caleb felt something crack in his chest. Noah didn't smile for strangers. Noah didn't smile for anyone except his father, and even then, rarely. The woman smiled back. "I'm Margaret," she said. "Most people call me Maggie." Noah reached for the small slate board he carried everywhere, his voice such as it was, and scratched something with the chalk. He held it up. "Pretty name." Maggie's smile widened. "Thank you, Noah. That's very kind." Caleb watched the exchange, a strange feeling settling in his gut. It wasn't suspicion exactly, more like awareness. This woman, whoever she was, had just done something no one else had managed in 4 years. She'd reached his son. "You should rest," Caleb said, setting a bowl of beans and salt pork on the table beside the cot. "Storm's cleared, but the roads won't be passable until afternoon." Maggie took the bowl, her fingers brushing his. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. The food, the shelter, your kindness." "It ain't kindness, just decency. In my experience, they're often the same thing." Caleb sat in the wooden chair by the hearth, keeping a careful distance. Proper. This was a lady, everything about her screamed money and breeding, from the cut of her coat to the way she held herself. A woman like that didn't belong in a cabin like this eating beans from a chipped bowl. "What were you doing out there?" he asked. "On Widow's Pass in the middle of winter." Maggie's jaw tightened. "Business. A meeting in Grand Pine Lodge. That's 50 miles north." "I know. Dangerous road, especially alone." She set the bowl down, her eyes meeting his. "I've ridden worse. And I wasn't supposed to be alone. My driver—" She paused, something dark crossing her face. "He abandoned me 2 days ago. Said the weather was turning, said he'd find help. Never came back." Caleb frowned. "Abandoned you?" "Yes." "On purpose?" Maggie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was harder. "I have enemies, Mr. Tucker. Caleb Tucker. Mr. Tucker. I have enemies who would benefit greatly from my death." He stared at her. "Someone tried to kill you." "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe my driver was simply a coward who ran at the first sign of trouble." She picked up the bowl again, stirring the beans without eating. "Either way, I'd be dead now if you hadn't found me." Caleb leaned back in his chair, processing. This woman wasn't just some lost traveler. She was someone important, important enough to have enemies, important enough to be worth killing. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Maggie looked up. For a long moment, she seemed to be weighing something, deciding how much to trust him. "My name is Margaret Shaw," she said finally. "I own the Shaw Cattle and Mining Company." Caleb's blood went cold. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Shaw Cattle and Mining was the largest operation west of the Missouri, hundreds of thousands of acres, thousands of head of cattle mining claims that produced more silver than most banks held in their vaults. And this woman he'd pulled half dead from a snowdrift. This woman eating beans in his one-room cabin owned all of it. "You're Margaret Shaw," he repeated. "Yes. The Margaret Shaw." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Is there another—" Caleb stood abruptly, moving to the window. He stared out at the snow-covered yard, his mind racing. Margaret Shaw was one of the richest people in the territory. Maybe the richest. She had more money than Caleb would see in 100 lifetimes. She had power, influence, connections. And he'd just served her beans from a dented pot. "Mr. Tucker." He didn't turn around. "You should have told me. Why would you have treated me differently?" "No." He said it without thinking, because it was true. "But you should have told me." Maggie rose from the cot, wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders. She crossed to where he stood, stopping just behind him. "I didn't tell you," she said softly, "because I wanted to know what kind of man you were. The real kind. Not the kind that shows itself when people know your name." Caleb turned. She was closer than he'd realized, her gray eyes looking up at him with something he couldn't name. "And what did you find?" he asked. "A good man," she said. "A rare man. The kind who saves a stranger's life and doesn't ask for anything in return." "I ain't rare. I just did what was right." "That's exactly what makes you rare." They stood there, inches apart, the fire crackling behind them. Noah watched from his pallet, Shadow's tail thumping softly against the floor. Maggie reached up and touched Caleb's face, just her fingertips against his jaw, light as snow. "Thank you, Caleb Tucker," she said. "I won't forget this." Then she stepped back, and the moment broke. By afternoon, the roads were passable. Caleb saddled Maggie's horse, a beautiful black mare, worth more than everything he owned combined, and led her to the porch. Maggie stood in the doorway, dressed in her dried coat, looking nothing like the half-dead woman he'd carried in the night before. She looked powerful now, in command. But when she looked at Noah standing beside his father, with Shadow at his heels, her expression softened. She knelt down to the boy's level. "Noah," she said, "it was an honor to meet you." Noah held up his slate. "Will you come back?" Maggie's breath caught. She looked at the words for a long moment, then up at the boy's hopeful face. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I promise I'll try." Noah nodded solemnly, accepting her answer with the gravity of a child who understood that adults couldn't always keep their promises. Maggie stood and turned to Caleb. "You won't take payment," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am. I expected as much." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small object, a silver pocket watch worn smooth with age. "This was my father's. He gave it to me the day he died. It's the most valuable thing I own, not because of what it's worth, but because of what it means." She pressed it into Caleb's hand. "Keep it," she said, "as a reminder." "Of what?" Her eyes met his. "That some debts can't be repaid with money." Before he could respond, she mounted her horse in one smooth motion, gathering the reins with practiced hands. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "Goodbye, Caleb Tucker." "Safe travels, Miss Shaw." She turned the mare toward the trail. At the edge of the tree line, she paused and looked back. "You're a good man," she called. "Better than you know." Then she was gone, disappearing into the white landscape like she'd never been there at all. Caleb stood on the porch, the pocket watch heavy in his hand, and watched until he couldn't see her anymore. Noah tugged at his sleeve. Caleb looked down. The boy held up his slate. "She'll come back." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But don't count on it, son. People like her, they don't belong in places like this." Noah shook his head, stubborn. "She will." Caleb didn't argue. He just ruffled the boy's hair and went back inside, closing the door on the cold. But that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Margaret Shaw, the richest woman in the territory. In his cabin, eating his beans, smiling at his son. He told himself it didn't matter. Told himself he'd done what any decent man would do, and that was the end of it. She'd go back to her mansion and her empire and her important life, and he'd stay here shoeing horses and mending fences, trying to keep his boy fed and warm. Their paths would never cross again. But deep down in a place he didn't like to visit, Caleb Tucker hoped he was wrong. 3 weeks passed, And Caleb told himself he'd forgotten her. He was lying. Every morning he woke before dawn, made coffee over the stove, and stared at the pocket watch on the shelf above the fireplace. Margaret Shaw's father's watch. The most valuable thing she owned, she'd said. And she'd given it to him. "Stupid," he muttered, pulling on his boots. "Fool woman." Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Shadow padded behind him, tail wagging. Caleb forced a smile. "Morning, son. Hungry." The boy nodded and climbed onto the wooden bench at the table. He was watching his father with those two knowing eyes, the ones that saw everything and said nothing. Caleb served up cold biscuits and the last of the bacon grease. They ate in silence the way they always did. But something had changed. Noah kept glancing at the pocket watch, kept looking toward the door like he expected someone to walk through it. "She ain't coming back," Caleb said finally. Noah's jaw tightened. He grabbed his slate and scratched out 2 words. "You're wrong." "I ain't wrong. I'm realistic. People like her don't—" The boy slammed his palm on the table. Caleb stopped. Noah had never done that before. Never showed anger, never pushed back. For 4 years, he'd been quiet in every way, not just his voice, but his whole being. Like the grief had hollowed him out and left nothing but silence. But now his eyes were blazing. He wrote on the slate fast and furious. "She promised. She said she'd try. Trying and doing ain't the same thing. You don't know that. I know how the world works. Maybe you're wrong about the world." Caleb stared at his son. 7 years old and arguing philosophy. Sarah would have laughed. Sarah would have been proud. The thought hit him like a fist to the chest. "Maybe I am," he said quietly. "But I can't afford to hope, Noah. Hoping hurts too much." The boy's expression softened. He erased the slate and wrote something new. Mom hoped, every day. Caleb's throat closed up. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just sat there staring at those 3 words, feeling 4 years of carefully constructed walls start to crack. Noah reached across the table and took his father's hand. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and son, bound by grief and love, and something that might have been hope if Caleb let himself feel it. Finally, he squeezed Noah's fingers and stood. "Come on," he said, his voice rough. "We got work to do." The days blurred together. Caleb threw himself into work with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years. He took every job Harlow offered, shoeing horses, mending wheels, building fences. He worked until his hands bled and his back screamed and his mind was too tired to think about anything except the next task. It didn't help. At night, lying in bed, he still saw her face, still heard her voice. "You're a good man, better than you know." "Damn fool woman," he whispered to the darkness. Shadow whined from his spot by the fire. Noah stirred on his pallet, but didn't wake. Caleb stared at the ceiling and waited for sleep that wouldn't come. A week after Margaret left, the rumors started. Caleb was in town picking up supplies at Hendricks's general store when he heard them. "Shaw woman almost died, they say." Old Miller was holding court near the pickle barrel, his voice carrying through the store. "Found half frozen on Widow's Pass. Some cowboy pulled her out." Caleb kept his eyes on the flour he was measuring. "Heard she's looking for him," Miller continued. "Offering a reward." That made Caleb's hands still. A reward. Hendricks leaned over the counter, interested. "How much?" "Don't know. But you know the Shaws. Probably more money than any of us will see in our lives." "She's not married, is she, the Shaw woman?" "Nope, runs that whole empire by herself. Richest woman in the territory, they say. Maybe the whole country." Caleb grabbed his flour and headed for the counter. He didn't want to hear any more, but Miller spotted him. "Hey, Tucker, you live out near Widow's Pass, don't you?" Caleb set the flour down, reaching for his coins. "I do." "See anything strange few weeks back? During that big storm." "Storm was bad. Didn't see much of anything." Miller squinted at him. "You sure word is the Shaw woman was found somewhere around there?" Caleb met the old man's eyes. "I said I didn't see anything." Something flickered across Miller's face. Suspicion maybe, or just curiosity. But he shrugged and turned back to his audience. "Probably some drifter found her. Long gone by now, I reckon." Caleb paid for his supplies and left. He didn't tell Noah about the rumors, didn't tell him about the reward. But that night after the boy was asleep, Caleb sat by the fire and turned the pocket watch over in his hands. She was looking for him, offering money. He should return the watch, should ride into Silver Falls, hand it to some servant at the gate, and be done with it. Clean break. No complications. But he couldn't make himself do it. The watch felt warm in his palm, like it belonged there. "You're a damn fool," he told himself. Shadow raised his head and whined. "Not you. Me." The dog put his head back down. Caleb closed his fingers around the watch and held it tight. 2 weeks after the storm, a stranger rode into Stillwater. Caleb was working at Harlow's hammering out a bent horseshoe when the man appeared. Tall, thin, wearing a suit too fine for these parts. He had a face like a knife, sharp and cold. "Looking for Caleb Tucker," the man said. Caleb didn't stop hammering. "Who's asking?" "Name's Silas Croft. I work for Victor Caine." The hammer slipped. Caleb caught it before it hit the ground, but his heart was pounding. Victor Caine. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Banker, land speculator, the kind of man who smiled while he robbed you blind. Word was, he'd been trying to buy out the Shaw operation for years. "Don't know any Victor Caine," Caleb said. "That's a shame." Croft stepped closer. "Because he knows you." "Does he now?" "Indeed. Mr. Caine is very interested in the events of 3 weeks ago, specifically the night a certain woman was rescued on Widow's Pass." Caleb set down the hammer and straightened to his full height. He was bigger than Croft by half a foot, broader by twice that. "Don't know what you're talking about." Croft smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Of course you don't." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "Mr. Caine is prepared to offer $500 for information about that night. Specifically, anything the woman might have said, any documents she might have been carrying." $500. More money than Caleb made in 2 years. Enough to fix the roof. Buy Noah new clothes. Put away something for the future. All he had to do was talk. Caleb looked at the envelope, then at Croft. "Get out." The smile faded. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Get out of here before I throw you out." Croft's expression went cold. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Tucker. Victor Caine is not a man you want as an enemy. And I ain't a man you want to threaten." Caleb took a step forward. "You got 3 seconds." For a moment, Croft didn't move. His hand twitched toward his hip where Caleb could see the bulge of a pistol. Then he seemed to think better of it. "Mr. Caine will remember this," he said. "So will I." "Good. Now get." Croft turned and walked to his horse. He mounted smoothly, looked back at Caleb one last time, then rode out of town. Caleb stood there, fists clenched, watching until the man disappeared. Harlow appeared at his shoulder. "What was that about?" "Nothing." "Didn't look like nothing." Caleb picked up his hammer. "It was nothing." But his hands were shaking. That night, Caleb made a decision. He waited until Noah was asleep, then pulled on his coat and stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, the stars sharp as broken glass. Shadow followed him, pressing against his leg. "Something's coming, boy," Caleb said quietly. "Something bad." The dog whined. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out the watch. The silver caught the starlight. Margaret Shaw had enemies. She'd told him that, and now those enemies knew about him. He should leave. Pack up Noah, take what they could carry, disappear into the territory, start over somewhere new. But that meant running, and Caleb Tucker had never run from anything in his life. Besides, where would they go? This cabin was all they had. This land, this life, this broken little family. He couldn't give that up, not without a fight. "All right then," he said to the night. "Come what may." He went back inside and locked the door. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Caleb was splitting wood behind the cabin when Noah came running, waving something over his head. The boy's face was flushed, his eyes bright with excitement. Behind him, a man in a clean suit sat astride a chestnut horse near the porch. Not Croft. Someone different. Someone who looked almost friendly. Caleb set down the axe. Noah skidded to a stop in front of him, shoving a thick envelope into his hands. Heavy paper, expensive. A red wax seal with an ornate letter S. Caleb's heart stuttered. "Mr. Tucker." The suited man dismounted and approached. "My name is Henry Wells. I've been sent by Miss Margaret Shaw." Caleb stared at the envelope. "What is this?" "A letter. Miss Shaw asked me to deliver it personally." Wells smiled. "She's been looking for you for some time. It took considerable effort to track you down." "How did you find me?" "The pocket watch. Miss Shaw mentioned she'd given it to the man who saved her. We made inquiries at every general store and trading post in a 100-mile radius. Someone in Stillwater remembered seeing you with a silver watch you didn't have before." Caleb should have been angry, should have felt hunted, exposed. Instead, all he felt was a strange kind of relief. She'd looked for him. She'd tried. She promised Noah had written. She said she'd try. "I've been instructed to wait for your response," Wells said, "if you're inclined to give one." Caleb broke the seal. The paper inside was heavy, covered in elegant handwriting. He read slowly, every word landing like a stone in still water. "Dear Caleb, I've thought about that night every day since I left your doorstep. About the way you didn't hesitate. About the way you looked at me not as a stranger, not as a burden, but simply as someone who needed help. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what I could give you. You just acted. And in doing so, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Decency isn't a transaction. It's a choice. I won't insult you with charity. But I want to offer you something you've earned not through circumstance but through character. I'm expanding operations into Copper Creek and need a foreman to oversee the new livestock division. The position comes with a salary of $120 a month, housing on the property, and schooling for Noah. But more than that, I'm offering you a partnership, a chance to build something meaningful. Not for me, but with me. I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees people, not profit. Someone like you. If you're willing, the position is yours." Margaret Caleb read it twice, 3 times. His hands were trembling. $120 a month. Housing. Schooling for Noah. More than he'd ever dreamed of. More than he'd ever let himself imagine. And she was offering it freely. Not as payment for saving her life, but as recognition of who he was. Noah tugged at his sleeve, eyes questioning. Caleb handed him the letter. The boy read it slowly, his lips moving silently over the words. When he finished, he looked up at his father with an expression Caleb hadn't seen in 4 years. Hope. Pure, unguarded hope. "I told you," he wrote on his slate. "I told you she'd come back." "You did," Caleb admitted. "You were right." "Are we going?" Caleb looked at his son. At the cabin behind them, small and worn and full of memories. At the land he'd carved a life from, with nothing but sweat and stubbornness. Then he looked at the letter in Noah's hands, at the future spread before them like a gift. "Yes," he said. "We're going." Noah's face split into a grin. He threw his arms around his father's waist, hugging tight. Caleb held him, feeling something break open in his chest. 4 years of grief, of fear, of barely surviving. 4 years of telling himself that hope was too dangerous to feel. And now this. "Mr. Tucker." Wells was watching them with a small smile. "Shall I tell Miss Shaw to expect you?" Caleb straightened one hand still on Noah's shoulder. "Tell her we'll be there by week's end." Wells nodded. "She'll be pleased." He mounted his horse, then paused. "One more thing. Miss Shaw wanted me to warn you, there are people who won't be happy about this arrangement. People who've been watching her operations closely. Victor Caine. Wells' expression flickered. You know the name. One of his men paid me a visit. Offered money for information. And you refused. I did. Wells studied him for a long moment. Miss Shaw chose well, he said finally. Safe travels, Mr. Tucker. He rode off, leaving Caleb and Noah alone in the yard. Shadow barked, tail wagging. Noah was still grinning, bouncing on his heels with excitement. He grabbed his slate and started writing furiously. Can I bring Shadow, Will? There be horses, real ones. Can I learn to rope? Will there be other children? Caleb laughed. It felt strange in his throat, rusty from disuse. Slow down, son. We'll figure it out when we get there. When do we leave tomorrow? Can we leave tomorrow? Day after. Got to pack up, settle things in town. Noah's face fell slightly. But we're going, Caleb added. That's what matters. We're going. The boy nodded, his grin returning. He ran toward the cabin, slate clutched to his chest, already planning what to bring. Caleb stood alone in the yard, the letter still warm in his hand. Margaret Shaw had changed everything with a few words on paper. Had given him something he'd stopped believing in years ago. A future. He looked up at the sky, at the clouds drifting lazily overhead. Thank you, he said quietly. To God, to fate, to the universe, to whoever was listening. Then he folded the letter carefully, tucked it into his pocket, and went inside to pack. 2 days later, they left Copper Creek behind. The cabin sat empty. Door locked, windows shuttered. Caleb had sold what he couldn't carry to Harlow for a fair price. The tools, the spare firewood, the chickens that scratched in the yard. It wasn't much. A few dollars barely worth counting. But it was enough to start fresh. Noah rode in front, perched on Bonnie's back, with Shadow trotting alongside. The boy hadn't stopped smiling since they'd set out, his eyes wide, as they took in the landscape unfolding before them. Caleb rode behind, leading the pack horse loaded with their belongings. Sarah's quilt. Emma's rag doll, the one Noah still slept with. The pocket watch tucked safely in his coat. Everything else was gone, left behind like old skin. It should have hurt, leaving the place where Sarah had laughed and Emma had taken her first steps, and Noah had spoken his last words. But somehow it didn't. The memories would come with them. The love would come with them. The grief too, but lighter now, carried by hope instead of crushed beneath it. They were halfway to Silver Falls when Caleb heard the horses. Behind them. Coming fast. He reined Bonnie to a stop and turned. 3 riders emerged from the trees. Hard men, armed, their faces grim. Caleb's gut went cold. Noah, he said quietly. Get behind me. The boy obeyed instantly, sliding back in the saddle, his small body pressed against his father's back. The riders approached and stopped 20 feet away. The leader was a big man with a scar across his chin and mean eyes. Caleb Tucker, the man called. Who's asking? Victor Caine sends his regards. Caleb's hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle. Tell Caine I ain't interested in his regards. The scarred man smiled. He thought you might say that, which is why he sent us to persuade you. Persuade me of what? To reconsider his offer. $500 for information about the Shaw woman. What she said, what she's planning. Simple business. I already gave my answer. Answers can change. The man's hand dropped to his pistol. Mr. Caine is a patient man, but even patience has limits. Caleb felt Noah trembling against his back. Felt Shadow growling low in his throat. 3 against 1. Bad odds. Worse with the boy here. But running wasn't an option. These men would follow. Let me make something clear. Caleb said, his voice steady. I don't know what Margaret Shaw is planning. I don't know anything about her business. She nearly died and I helped her. That's the whole story. Then you won't mind telling Mr. Caine that yourself? I'll mind plenty. The scarred man sighed. I was hoping we could do this easy. He drew his pistol. Caleb moved faster. His rifle cleared the holster in one smooth motion, barrel leveled at the man's chest before anyone else could react. I got one shot, Caleb said quietly. But I promise you, it'll be enough. The scarred man froze. His two companions had their hands on their guns, but they hadn't drawn. You won't make it, the man said. There's 3 of us. Maybe. But you'll be dead before you find out. For a long moment no one moved. Then from behind Caleb a sound, a small strangled sound, a word. Stop. Caleb's blood turned to ice. Noah had spoken. His son had spoken. The scarred man's eyes widened. He looked past Caleb to the boy, surprise breaking through his hard expression. Caleb didn't turn. Couldn't turn. If he moved, everything would fall apart. Noah, he said, barely a whisper. The boy's hands tightened on his coat. Please. Noah's voice was hoarse, broken like rust scraping against iron. Don't hurt him. The scarred man stared. His companions stared. Caleb felt tears burning in his eyes, but he didn't blink, didn't lower the rifle. You heard him, he said. Right away. Now. Something shifted in the scarred man's face. Not fear exactly. Something else. Something almost like shame. This ain't over, he said. But his voice had lost its edge. Yes, it is. Tell Caine if he sends anyone else, I'll kill them. No warnings, no second chances. You understand? The man nodded slowly. Go. They went. Caleb watched until they disappeared into the trees, until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing. Then he lowered the rifle. His whole body was shaking. Noah. He turned in the saddle, gathering his son into his arms. Noah, you spoke. The boy was crying, silent tears streaming down his face. I had to, he whispered. His voice was still rough, still broken. I couldn't let them. I know. Caleb held him tight, pressing his face into the boy's hair. I know, son, I know. They stayed like that for a long time, father and son clinging to each other on an empty road. Shadow whined and pressed against Bonnie's legs. Finally, Caleb pulled back. He cupped Noah's face in his hands, looking into those eyes, Sarah's eyes, that had been silent for so long. You did good, he said. You hear me? You did so good. Noah nodded, a small smile breaking through the tears. Can I? The boy swallowed, struggling with words that hadn't been used in years. Can I talk? More? Caleb laughed, a broken, joyful sound. You can talk as much as you want, son. Every day. Every minute. I'll never get tired of hearing you. Noah's smile widened. Good, he whispered. Because I have a lot to say. They rode on toward Silver Falls, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, the past. Ahead of them, the future. And between them, a miracle that neither had dared to hope for. Noah was speaking again, and nothing would ever be the same. Silver Falls appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent. Noah sat straighter in the saddle, his eyes wide. He hadn't stopped talking since morning. Small words, broken sentences, his voice growing stronger with every mile. Is that it? He asked, pointing ahead. Caleb knotted his throat tight. That's it. The Shaw estate sprawled across the valley like something from a dream. White fences stretched toward the horizon. Cattle dotted the pastures, thousands of them. And at the center of it all, a house that made Caleb's cabin look like a dog kennel. It's big, Noah whispered. Yeah. Caleb swallowed. It is. They rode through the main gate past workers who stopped to stare. A cowboy on a paint horse approached, his expression wary. Help you, mister. Caleb Tucker. Miss Shaw is expecting me. The cowboy's eyebrows rose. You're Tucker. He looked Caleb up and down, then glanced at Noah. "She said you'd be coming. Follow me." They wound through the property past barns and stables and bunkhouses. Everywhere Caleb looked, there was activity, men working horses, training the organized chaos of a massive operation running at full tilt. This was Margaret's world, and he was supposed to belong here. The cowboy led them to the main house and dismounted. "Wait here. I'll tell her you've arrived." He disappeared inside. Caleb sat frozen in the saddle, suddenly aware of every patch on his coat, every scuff on his boots. He looked like what he was, a poor cowboy from a one-room cabin so far out of his depth, he might as well be drowning. "Pa!" He looked down at Noah. "I'm scared," the boy admitted, his voice small. "Me too, son." "Really? Really?" Noah considered this. "But we're still staying." Caleb thought about the letter in his pocket, about the words Margaret had written. "Someone who sees people, not profit." "Yeah," he said. "We're staying." The front door opened. Margaret Shaw stepped onto the porch. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her dark hair pulled back from her face. No jewelry, no pretense. She looked nothing like the half-frozen woman Caleb had pulled from the snow, but her eyes were the same, sharp, steady, real. "Caleb Tucker," she said, and there was warmth in her voice. "You came. You asked." A smile touched her lips. "I did." Her gaze shifted to Noah. "And this must be the young man I've heard so much about." Noah's face flushed. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Hello, Miss Shaw." Margaret's expression flickered surprise, then something deeper. She looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He started talking again. Caleb said quietly, "Yesterday. First words in 4 years." Margaret pressed a hand to her heart. "Oh, Noah." She descended the porch steps and stopped in front of the boy. "That's wonderful. Truly wonderful." Noah ducked his head shy. "Thank you, ma'am. None of that. Call me Maggie." She reached up and squeezed his hand gently. "Welcome to Silver Falls." She turned to Caleb, her eyes bright. "Both of you," she added. "Welcome home." Home. The word hit Caleb like a physical blow. He'd had a home once. Before Sarah died, before Emma followed, before grief stole his son's voice and left them both hollow. Could he have one again? "Come inside," Margaret said. "You must be exhausted." They followed her into the house. The interior was grand but not ostentatious, polished wood floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked comfortable rather than merely expensive. A fire crackled in an enormous stone fireplace. Noah's mouth fell open. "It's like a castle." Margaret laughed. "Hardly, but it serves its purpose." She knelt in front of the boy. "Are you hungry? My cook makes the best apple pie in the territory." Noah looked at Caleb, uncertain. "Go on," Caleb said. The boy's face lit up. "Yes, please." Margaret took his hand. "Follow me. And bring that handsome dog of yours." Shadow's tail wagged as they disappeared toward what Caleb assumed was the kitchen. He stood alone in the grand entrance hall, feeling like an intruder in someone else's dream. "You look lost." He turned. Margaret had reappeared, watching him from the doorway. "I am lost," he admitted. "This place, all of it. I don't belong here." "You do." She walked toward him, stopping close enough that he could smell lavender. "You belong exactly where I put you, and I put you here." "Why?" "I told you in my letter. You told me about character and decency, but that's not the whole story, is it?" Her expression shifted. Something guarded crept into her eyes. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." "Then tell me the real reason." Margaret turned away, moving to the fireplace. She stared into the flames for a long moment. Victor Caine, she said finally. Caleb's jaw tightened. His men found me. On the road here. She spun around. What? 3 of them offered money for information about you. When I refused, they got persuasive. Are you hurt? Is Noah? We're fine. I convinced them to leave. How? Rifle to the chest tends to clarify things. Margaret's face went pale. Caleb, I'm so sorry. I never meant to put you in danger. You didn't. Caine did. He stepped closer. Now tell me who he is. The truth. She sank into a chair by the fire, suddenly looking smaller. Victor Caine was my father's partner, she said. 20 years ago, they built this company together. But Caine was greedy. He started skimming profits, falsifying records, selling company secrets to competitors. My father found out and confronted him. What happened? Caine tried to have him killed, made it look like a riding accident. My father survived barely, but he was never the same after. Spent his last years building a case against Caine, gathering evidence. Did he succeed? No. He died before he could finish. Her hands clenched in her lap. Caine walked free, and he's been trying to destroy everything my father built ever since. So this is revenge him coming after you. It's more than that. Margaret looked up, her eyes fierce. 3 weeks ago, I received word that Caine has been buying up land around Silver Falls. Quiet-like, through shell companies and false names. He's planning something big. What? I don't know, but that meeting I was riding to when you found me, it was supposed to be with a man who had information. Names, dates, proof of what Caine is planning. Your driver abandoned you before you could get there. Yes, and I'm certain now that Caine was behind it. Caleb processed this. The pieces were falling into place, the desperate ride through the blizzard, the men on the road, the job offer that seemed too good to be true. You didn't bring me here just because I saved your life, he said slowly. You brought me here because you need someone you can trust. Margaret nodded. Everyone else in my organization could be compromised. Caine has money, influence, reach. He's bought half the lawmen in the territory and bribed the other half. But I refused his offer. Exactly. She stood, closing the distance between them. You could have taken his money, Caleb. $500 is a fortune to a man in your position, but you didn't. It wasn't right. Most men don't care about right. They care about survival. Maybe I'm not most men. A smile crossed her face, the first real one he'd seen since he arrived. No, she said softly. You're not. They stood there, inches apart, the fire crackling behind them. Caleb wanted to touch her, wanted to brush that strand of hair from her face, pull her close, tell her everything would be all right. But he didn't. Couldn't. She was his employer now, the richest woman in the territory. He was a cowboy with nothing to his name but a pocket watch and a silent son who'd just started talking again. What do you need me to do? He asked. Margaret's expression hardened. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the steel that had built an empire. Help me stop him, she said. Help me bring Victor Caine down before he destroys everything. How? I'm still working on that. She moved to a desk in the corner and pulled out a folder. But I need someone to oversee the Copper Creek operation. Someone loyal, someone Caine hasn't gotten to yet. It's the perfect cover for what I really need. Which is eyes, ears. Someone who can move around without drawing suspicion. Ask questions. Gather information. She handed him the folder. Caine has been focusing his purchases around Copper Creek. I don't know why, but I intend to find out. Caleb opened the folder. Maps, purchase records, names he didn't recognize. This is dangerous, he said. Yes. And you're asking me to do it anyway. I'm not asking. Margaret met his eyes. I'm offering. The job is real, the salary, the housing, the schooling for Noah, all of it. But if you want to help me fight Caine, the opportunity is there. Caleb looked at the papers in his hands, at the woman standing before him, at the future she was offering, a real future with purpose and meaning, and maybe, just maybe, something more. Noah stays safe, he said. No matter what happens. I swear it. And you tell me everything. No more secrets. Agreed. He closed the folder. Then I'm in. The next few days passed in a blur. Margaret set them up in a cottage near the main house. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a fireplace big enough to warm every corner. Noah ran from room to room, touching everything, his voice growing stronger with each hour. Pa, look. A real bed with blankets and everything. I see it, son. And Shadow can stay inside. Course he can. The boy threw his arms around Caleb's waist. Thank you, Pa, for bringing us here. Caleb hugged him back, his throat tight. Wasn't just me, you remember that. Noah pulled back, his eyes serious. I know. Miss Maggie. She's special. She is. Do you like her? The question caught Caleb off guard. She's my employer. That's not what I asked. Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. It's complicated, Caleb said finally. Noah considered this. Ma was complicated too. You told me. That's different. Why? Because your mother wasn't the richest woman in the territory. Because she didn't have enemies trying to kill her. Because loving her didn't feel like jumping off a cliff. But he couldn't say any of that. Just is, he said instead. Now come on, we got work to do. Caleb threw himself into the job with everything he had. He learned the operation from the ground up, the cattle counts, the breeding schedules, the complex web of supply routes and market connections. Margaret's foreman, a grizzled old hand named Pete, took him under his wing. Shaw's a good woman, Pete said one evening as they watched the sun set over the pastures. Fair to her workers, tough on her enemies, but she's got a target on her back. Caine. Pete spat in the dirt. That snake's been circling for years, waiting for her to slip up. Has she? Not yet. But she's been getting desperate lately. That trip to Grand Pine, the one where she almost died, that was supposed to change everything. Some kind of meeting with a source who had information on Caine. Caleb's ears perked up. She told me about that. Did she tell you the source is dead? Cold dread settled in Caleb's stomach. What? Found him 2 days ago. Shot in his own home. Made to look like a robbery. Caine. Most likely. But nobody can prove it. Pete turned to face him. You watch yourself, Tucker. Caine knows you're here by now. Knows what you did for Miss Shaw. He'll come for you sooner or later. Let him come. Pete studied him for a long moment. You really mean that, don't you? I got nothing to lose except my son, and I'll die before I let anyone hurt him. That's what I figured. Pete clapped him on the shoulder. You're the real thing, Tucker. Don't let this place change that. That night, Caleb told Margaret about the dead source. She already knew. His name was Thomas Brennan, she said, her voice hollow. He was a good man, had a wife, 3 children. Now they're alone because he tried to help me. It's not your fault. Isn't it? She stood at the window of her study, staring into the darkness. I asked him to gather information. I put him in Caine's crosshairs. He made his own choice, and he paid for it with his life. She turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed. How many more people have to die before this ends? Caleb crossed the room and took her hands. They were cold, trembling. None, he said firmly. We're going to stop him. How? Every time I get close, he slips away. Every source I find turns up dead. Every plan I make falls apart. Then we make a new plan. Together. She looked up at him, vulnerability cracking through her armor. Why do you care so much? She whispered. You barely know me. I know enough. He squeezed her hands. I know you're kind to strangers, even when you have no reason to be. I know you gave my son hope when he had none. I know you see people for who they are, not what they can give you. Caleb. Let me help you, Maggie, please. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. All right, she said. Together. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Caleb was working in the stable checking the horses for the morning's work when a rider came tearing through the gates at full gallop. Tucker! Where's Tucker? Caleb stepped out, hand on his pistol. Here. The rider, one of Margaret's scouts, practically fell from his saddle. Caine's men. They're coming. At least 20 of them. Coming here. No. To Copper Creek. They're going to burn it down. Caleb's blood went cold. The Copper Creek operation wasn't just cattle and land. It was the cover for everything: the investigation, the information gathering, the fight against Caine. If it burned, so did their chances of stopping him. Where's Miss Shaw? In town, meeting with the banker. Get her, now. The scout remounted and rode off. Caleb ran to the cottage. Noah was inside with Shadow practicing his letters at the kitchen table. Pa, what's wrong? Get your coat. We're going to the main house. Why? Something's happening. I need you safe. Noah didn't argue. He grabbed his coat, whistled for Shadow, and followed his father out the door. They reached the main house just as Margaret's carriage came thundering up the drive. She jumped down before it fully stopped, her face pale. I heard. How many men? 20, maybe more. Damn. She turned to Pete, who'd appeared beside her. How many can we muster? 15 if we pull everyone in. That's not enough. It's what we've got. Margaret's jaw clenched. She looked at Caleb, desperation in her eyes. There's no time, she said. They'll reach Copper Creek in 2 hours. Even if we ride now, we'll be outnumbered. Then we don't fight fair. What do you mean? Caleb's mind was racing. 20 men against 15 was bad odds. But Copper Creek had advantages. Narrow valleys, rocky passes, terrain that favored defense over assault. I know that land, he said. Lived there 6 years. There's a pass about a mile from the main buildings. Only one way through. So we don't try to stop them at Copper Creek. We stop them at the pass. Margaret's eyes widened. An ambush. A defensive position. We get there first, dig in, and make them pay for every inch. Pete stepped forward. It could work. If we ride hard, we might beat them there. Might isn't good enough, Margaret said. We need to be certain. Then we leave now. Caleb turned to his son. Noah, you stay here. Miss Maggie's housekeeper will look after you. The boy's face crumpled. But Pa, no arguments. This is dangerous. I know, but... Noah's voice broke. What if you don't come back? Caleb knelt in front of his son, taking his face in his hands. I'm coming back, he said. I promise. Ma promised, too. The words hit like a bullet. Caleb pulled Noah into his arms, holding him tight. The boy was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. I know, Caleb whispered. I know she did. And I know I can't promise for certain. But I'm going to try my damnedest. You hear me? I'm going to fight like hell to come back to you. Noah nodded against his chest. And if something happens... Caleb's voice broke. He forced himself to continue. Miss Maggie will take care of you. She promised. I did. Margaret knelt beside them, her hand on Noah's shoulder. I swear to you, Noah, if anything happens to your father, you'll have a home here, always. The boy looked at her, tears still falling. Promise, he whispered. I promise. Noah threw his arms around her neck, hugging her tight. Over the boy's head, Margaret met Caleb's eyes. Something passed between them, gratitude, fear, and something deeper. Something neither of them was ready to name. Ride fast, she said. I will. He kissed his son's forehead, mounted his horse, and rode toward Copper Creek. Behind him, Noah's voice followed him into the wind. Come back. Pa, please. Come back." Caleb didn't turn around. If he did, he'd never be able to leave. They reached the pass with 20 minutes to spare. Caleb jumped from his horse before it fully stopped, already shouting orders. "Pete, take 5 men to the ridge on the left. Jensen, you take the right. Rest of you with me at the center." The men moved without question. They'd heard about Tucker by now, the cowboy who'd saved Miss Shaw's life, the one who'd stared down Caine's men on the road and lived to tell about it. They trusted him. God help them if he was wrong. Caleb positioned himself behind a cluster of boulders at the narrowest point of the pass. From here, anyone coming through would have to ride single file, easy targets, if they had enough ammunition. If Caine's men didn't find another way around. If 100 other things didn't go wrong. Tucker. He turned. Margaret was riding up behind him, rifle slung across her back. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Fighting for what's mine." She dismounted and crouched beside him. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you? This isn't fun. This is dangerous. Yes, I know." Her eyes met his, fierce and determined. "But this is my fight, Caleb. My land, my people, my responsibility. And if you die, then at least I died fighting." She checked her rifle movements, smooth and practiced. "Besides, I'm a better shot than half your men." "That ain't saying much." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "It's saying enough." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to throw her over his shoulder and carry her back to safety. But he knew that look in her eyes, the same look Sarah had when she'd made up her mind about something. No force on earth could change it. "Stay behind me," he said, "and don't do anything stupid." "I could say the same to you." Before he could respond, a shout came from the ridge. "Riders coming fast." Caleb raised his rifle and peered through the gap in the rocks. They came like a wave. 23 men, maybe more, thundering toward the pass in a cloud of dust and fury. At their head rode the scarred man from the road. Caleb recognized him even at this distance. "Steady," Caleb called out. "Wait for my signal." The riders drew closer. 300 yards, 200, 150. "Steady." 100 yards. He could see their faces now, hard and determined. Now. 15 rifles cracked as one. The lead riders went down. Horses screamed. Men cursed and scattered, diving for cover. Reload. Keep firing. The pass became a killing ground. Caine's men tried to push through, but the narrow gap worked against them. Every time they advanced, another volley drove them back. Bodies piled up at the entrance, forcing those behind to climb over their fallen comrades. "They're falling back!" Pete shouted from the ridge. Caleb watched the retreating riders regroup about 200 yards out. The scarred man was shouting orders, pointing toward the ridges on either side. "They're going to try to flank us," Caleb said. "Jensen, hold the right. Pete, watch your left." "Got it." The next assault came from 3 directions at once. Caleb's men held the center while Pete and Jensen fought off attacks on the ridges. Bullets flew. Men fell. The air filled with smoke and screams. Margaret fired beside him, calm and steady, dropping riders with every shot. "You weren't lying," Caleb said between volleys. "About being a good shot." "I never lie about guns." A bullet whizzed past his ear. He ducked, heart pounding. "We can't hold forever," she said. "They've got more men, more ammunition." "We don't need forever, just long enough." "For what?" Caleb didn't answer. He was watching the scarred man who'd pulled back to confer with his lieutenants. Something was wrong. The attacks were fierce, but they weren't committed. Caine's men were testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. Why? Unless this wasn't the main attack. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "Maggie." "What?" "This is a distraction." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Think about it. 20 men to burn down a cattle operation. That's overkill. And why telegraph the attack? Why give us time to prepare?" "Because they wanted us here," Margaret whispered. "Away from Silver Falls." "Noah," Caleb was on his feet before she could respond, running for his horse. "Caleb, wait!" He didn't stop. Couldn't stop. His son was back at Silver Falls, protected by a handful of servants and a housekeeper. If Caine sent men there while everyone was here... He mounted Bonnie and kicked her into a gallop. Behind him, Margaret screamed his name, but the wind swallowed her voice. He rode like the devil himself was chasing him. The trip from Copper Creek to Silver Falls was 2 hours at normal pace. Caleb made it in 1. Bonnie was lathered and heaving when they thundered through the main gates, but she didn't slow. She knew. Animals always knew. The estate was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb drew his pistol and slid from the saddle before the horse stopped moving. Noah. No answer. He ran for the cottage, heart pounding so hard he could barely think. The door was open. Inside, furniture overturned. Broken glass on the floor. Shadow lying motionless near the fireplace. No, 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 no. Caleb fell to his knees beside the dog. Blood matted the fur on Shadow's head, but his chest was rising and falling. Alive, barely. Noah. He searched the cottage, every room, every corner. Nothing. His son was gone. A piece of paper lay on the kitchen table. Caleb grabbed it, his hands shaking so badly he could barely read the words. Tucker. I have the boy. If you want him back, bring Margaret Shaw to the old Brennan mine at midnight. Come alone, both of you. Any tricks and the boy dies. Caine. The paper crumpled in Caleb's fist. 4 years ago, he'd lost his wife and daughter. Had watched the fever take them one by one, helpless to do anything but hold their hands and pray. He'd survived that. Barely. Had rebuilt his life around Noah, the only piece of Sarah and Emma he had left. And now, Caine had taken him. Rage, unlike anything he'd ever felt, surged through his veins. Hot and cold at once, burning away everything except one simple truth. He was going to kill Victor Caine. Tonight. Margaret found him 2 hours later, sitting on the cottage floor with Shadow's head in his lap. She'd ridden hard to catch up, her face pale with fear. Caleb. What happened? Where's... He held up the note. She read it, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to fury. That bastard. He was never after Copper Creek. Caleb's voice was hollow. He was after leverage. This is my fault. Margaret sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. I brought you here. I put Noah in danger. You didn't know. I should have. She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was so focused on beating Caine, I didn't think about who else might get hurt. Thomas Brennan, his family, and now your son. He's not dead. Caleb said it like a prayer, like saying it would make it true. The note says midnight. That means Caine needs him alive. For now. For now is all we need. He stood slowly, lifting Shadow carefully and laying him on the bed. The dog whimpered but didn't wake. I'm going, Caleb said. Tonight. I'm coming with you. No. The note says both of us. It's a trap. I know. Margaret crossed to him, taking his hands. But if I don't go, he'll kill Noah anyway. You know that. Caleb did know. Caine wanted Margaret dead. Noah was just bait. But if they both went, they'd both die. Unless... There has to be another way, he said. There isn't. Margaret's grip tightened. Caleb, listen to me. My life isn't worth more than your son's. If trading me for Noah is what it takes, don't. He pulled his hands away. Don't you dare say that. It's true. It's not. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. You hear me? It's not. Noah would never forgive me if I traded your life for his. He's 7 years old, and he knows the difference between right and wrong. So do I. And the right thing is finding another way. He released her and began pacing. Think. What does Caine want? Really want? Me dead. My company destroyed. What else? Margaret frowned, thinking. The land around Copper Creek. He's been buying it up for months. Why? I don't know. There's nothing special about... Wait. Her eyes widened. The mineral rights. What about them? My father surveyed that land 30 years ago, found traces of silver but not enough to justify mining. Everyone forgot about it. She moved to the desk and started shuffling through papers. But what if the surveys were wrong? What if there's more than anyone realized? You think Caine knows something you don't. I think Caine had a man inside my organization for years, someone who might have found my father's original survey notes. She pulled out a folder, flipping through pages. Here, look at this. Caleb leaned over her shoulder. Maps, geological surveys, notes in a handwriting he didn't recognize. These are my father's private files, Margaret said. I never looked at them closely before. But here, she pointed to a section circled in red ink. He marked a vein that runs right through the Brennan mine property. The same mine where Caine wants us to meet. Yes. Margaret's voice sharpened. Don't you see, he's not just using the mine as a meeting place. He owns it now. The Brennan family sold it last month right after Thomas was killed. So Caine murdered Brennan for his land. And framed it as robbery. Margaret slammed the folder shut. That mine is worth millions if there's silver in it. Millions that should belong to me. This gives us leverage, Caleb said slowly. If we can prove Caine killed Brennan for the mine, we'd have enough to bring him down, not just for tonight, but permanently. Hope flickered in Caleb's chest. Small, fragile, but real. Where would that proof be? Thomas was gathering documents before he died. Evidence of Caine's land, purchases, his shell companies, everything. Margaret met his eyes. If we could find those documents, where would he keep them? I don't know. His house was ransacked. But Thomas was careful. He would have hidden copies somewhere safe. His family, Caleb said. His wife might know. She's in town, at her sister's house. Caleb checked his watch. 6 hours until midnight. Then we've got work to do. They found Martha Brennan in a small house on the edge of Stillwater. She was a thin woman worn down by grief, but her eyes were sharp. When Margaret explained why they'd come, those eyes filled with something that looked like hope. Thomas knew this day might come, she said quietly. He told me if anything happened to him, I should give these to someone I trusted. She pulled a lockbox from beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were dozens of documents. Ledgers, correspondence, purchase agreements, all bearing Victor Caine's name or the names of his shell companies. This is everything, Margaret breathed. Everything we need. He died for those papers, Martha said. Make sure it means something. It will. Margaret took the woman's hands. I promise you. Caine will pay for what he did. They rode back to Silver Falls with the documents secured in Margaret's saddlebag. 4 hours until midnight. This changes everything, Margaret said as they dismounted. With this evidence, I can go to the territorial marshal. Get a warrant for Caine's arrest. That takes time we don't have. I know, but after tonight, there might not be an after tonight. Margaret stopped. What are you saying? Caleb turned to face her. I'm saying we still have to go to that mine. We still have to face Caine, and we still might not survive. Then we make copies of the documents first. Send them to the marshal, to the newspapers, to everyone who matters. If we don't come back, the evidence still gets out. And if Caine kills Noah before we can stop him? The question hung in the air. Margaret closed her eyes. When she opened them, her expression was resolved. Then we don't give him the chance. How? We go early, before midnight, catch him off guard. He'll have men watching. Probably, but he won't expect us to attack. She grabbed his arm. Caleb, think about it. He wants us scared and desperate. Wants us to walk in begging for mercy. But if we hit him first hard and fast, we might have a chance. Exactly. Caleb considered it. The plan was risky, suicidal maybe. But waiting until midnight meant giving Caine every advantage. At least this way they controlled the timing. "We need help," he said. "Pete and the others are still at Copper Creek cleaning up. They won't make it back in time." "Then it's just us." Margaret nodded. "Just us." 2 hours later, they left Silver Falls behind. Caleb rode with Margaret's father's pocket watch in his coat and a prayer on his lips. Beside him, Margaret sat tall in her saddle rifle, across her back, looking every inch the cattle queen she was. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The Brennan mine sat in a narrow valley accessible only by a single winding road. As they approached, Caleb counted guards, 2 at the entrance, 2 more on the ridge above. "I see 4, he whispered. "5, Margaret corrected. "There's one in the rocks to the left." "Good eye." "I've had practice." They tied their horses a quarter-mile out and continued on foot. The guards were spread thin, watching for an approach from the main road. They weren't expecting anyone to come through the forest. Caleb took the first one from behindhand over the mouth knife to the throat. The man went down without a sound. Margaret handled the second with equal efficiency, her movements cold and precise. The third saw them coming. "Hey, who?" Caleb's fist connected with his jaw before he could finish. The guard crumpled. 2 left. They found the 4th asleep at his post bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand. Caleb almost felt bad about knocking him unconscious. Almost. The 5th was trickier. He'd positioned himself high on the ridge with a clear view of the mine entrance. Getting to him would mean exposing themselves. "I'll draw his attention," Margaret said. "You circle around." "That's too dangerous." "It's our only option." She checked her pistol. "Trust me." Before Caleb could argue, she stepped out of cover. "Hey, up there!" The guard spun, raising his rifle. Caleb moved. He hit the man from behind, driving him into the rocks. The rifle flew from his hands. They struggled, grappling in the darkness, until Caleb finally landed a blow that ended it. He looked down at Margaret. She was pale, but steady. "You all right?" "Fine. Let's move." They entered the mine. The tunnel was dark, lit only by scattered lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Caleb moved first, pistol drawn, every sense straining. Voices ahead. Men talking. He held up a hand, signaling Margaret to stop. "Should just kill the brat and be done with it." "Boss says wait. Wants the woman to see him die." Cold fury washed through Caleb. He forced it down, focusing on the task. 2 men, guarding something or someone. He looked at Margaret. She nodded. They burst around the corner. 2 shots. 2 bodies. And there, tied to a chair in the center of the chamber, was Noah. "Pa!" The boy was bruised, his lip split, but he was alive. Alive and crying and reaching for his father. Caleb ran to him, cutting the ropes with shaking hands. "I got you, son. I got you. I knew. You'd come. I knew. You'd find me. Always." Caleb pulled him into his arms, holding tight. "I'll always find you." Margaret stood guard, scanning the tunnel for more threats. "We need to go," she said. "Now." Caleb lifted Noah. The boy was light, too light, and turned toward the exit, and froze. Victor Caine stood at the tunnel entrance, flanked by a dozen armed men. "Leaving so soon?" Caine smiled. "But the party's just getting started." Caleb shifted Noah behind him, shielding the boy with his body. 12 men, 12 guns pointed at them, and Victor Caine standing at the center, smiling like he'd already won. "I have to admit," Caine said, stepping closer, "I'm impressed. Taking out 5 of my guards, sneaking in through the back. I underestimated you, Tucker." "Let us go." "No." Caine's smile widened. "I don't think I will." Margaret stepped forward, her rifle still raised. "It's over, Caine. We have the Brennan documents. Everything. Your shell companies, the land purchases, Thomas's murder. It's all going to the marshal at dawn." Something flickered in Caine's eyes. Fear, anger, both. You're bluffing. Am I? Margaret's voice was steel. Martha Brennan kept copies. Hidden. Your men never found them. Caine's jaw tightened. He looked at his men, then back at Margaret. Even if that's true, he said slowly, you won't live to deliver them. Kill us, and the documents still get out. We sent copies to 3 different newspapers before we left. If we don't return by morning, they publish everything. Caleb watched Caine's face, looking for the crack in his armor. There. The man's confidence wavered. Just for a second, but it was enough. You're lying, Caine said again, but his voice had lost its certainty. Try me. The standoff stretched. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Noah stepped out from behind his father. Stop, the boy said. Caleb grabbed for him. Noah, get back. But Noah pulled away, walking toward Caine with steady steps. You're a bad man, Noah said. His voice was stronger now, clearer. 4 years of silence had given way to something powerful. You hurt people. You killed Mr. Brennan. You took me from my home. Caine stared at the boy, genuinely surprised. And you're... What? Going to stop me? No. Noah stopped a few feet from him, his small body rigid with defiance. They are. He pointed behind Caine. Everyone turned. Pete stood at the mine entrance, rifle raised, flanked by a dozen of Margaret's men. Evening, boys, Pete said calmly. Might want to put those guns down. Caine's face went white. How? Figured something was wrong when you pulled back at Copper Creek, Pete said. Rode hard to catch up. Found your trail easy enough. You're outmatched, Caine, Margaret said. It's over. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Caine lunged. He grabbed Noah, pulling a pistol and pressing it to the boy's head. Nobody move. Caleb's heart stopped. Let him go, he said, his voice barely human. Let him go, or I swear to God. You'll what? Caine's arm tightened around Noah's throat. Shoot me. You'll hit the boy. Please, Caleb's voice broke. He's just a child. He's leverage. Caine backed toward a side tunnel, dragging Noah with him. Anyone follows me, he dies. Caine! I said nobody moves. The boy's eyes met Caleb's. No fear there. No panic. Just trust. Noah went limp. His body dropped like a stone, sliding out of Caine's grip before the man could react. Caleb fired. The bullet caught Caine in the shoulder, spinning him around. His gun clattered to the ground. Pete's men surged forward, tackling Caine's guards before they could respond. The mine erupted into chaos, shouting, struggling, the sounds of men fighting and falling. But Caleb saw none of it. He was already running. Noah lay on the ground where he'd fallen, small and still. Noah, Noah. The boy's eyes fluttered open. Did I do good, Pa? Caleb laughed a broken, sobbing sound and pulled his son into his arms. Yeah, son, you did real good. They held Victor Caine in the Silver Falls jail while they waited for the territorial marshal. The man who'd terrorized the territory for years looked smaller now, diminished. His shoulder was bandaged, his wrists shackled, his empire crumbling around him. Margaret stood outside his cell, arms crossed. 20 years, she said quietly. 20 years you've been trying to destroy my family. And for what money, power? Caine looked up, his eyes hollow. Your father ruined me. My father caught you stealing. That's not ruin. That's justice. Justice. Caine spat the word. There's no such thing. Only winners and losers. Then I guess you lost. She turned and walked away. Outside, Caleb waited with Noah. The boy was wrapped in a blanket, shadow pressed against his side. The dog had recovered enough to make the journey. Nothing could keep him from Noah, not even a cracked skull. Is it really over? Noah asked. Yeah, son, it's over. What happens now? Caleb looked at Margaret, who'd stopped beside them. Now, he said, we go home. The ride back to Silver Falls took most of the day. They traveled slowly, no rush now that the danger had passed. Pete and the others had stayed behind to help transport Caine and his men to face justice. Noah fell asleep in the saddle slumped against his father's chest. Caleb held him close, savoring the warmth, the weight, the simple miracle of having his son safe. Margaret rode beside them silent for most of the journey. But as they crested the final hill and the estate spread out below them, she spoke. "Caleb." "Yeah. What I said before, about trading my life for Noah's." She paused. "I meant it." "I know. Does that change anything between us?" He considered the question. The woman beside him had been willing to die for his son. Had fought alongside him, planned with him, trusted him when she had no reason to. "It changes everything," he said finally. She looked at him uncertain. "Good or bad?" "Good." He met her eyes. "Definitely good." A smile crossed her face, small at first, then growing. "I'm glad." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The territorial marshal arrived with a team of deputies. They took custody of Caine and his men, seizing documents and gathering evidence. Thomas Brennan's murder was officially reopened. His widow and children would receive a settlement from Caine's seized assets, not enough to bring back their husband and father, but something. The mine proved to be worth even more than Margaret's father had suspected. Enough silver to fund the Shaw operation for generations. And through it all, Caleb worked. He threw himself into his role as foreman, learning the business from the ground up. The men respected him now, not just because Miss Shaw trusted him, but because he'd earned it. Noah flourished. The boy attended lessons with a tutor Margaret had hired, devouring books like he'd been starving for them his whole life. His voice grew stronger every day, filling the cottage with questions and stories and laughter. Shadow healed. The old dog had more gray in his muzzle, now moved a little slower, but his tail still wagged whenever Noah called his name. It was a good life, better than Caleb had ever dared to hope for. But something was missing. He didn't realize what until Margaret found him one evening, sitting alone on the cottage porch. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Ain't worth that much." "Try me." Caleb stared out at the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I keep waiting," he said slowly, "for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong." "That's understandable, after everything you've been through." "That's just it." He turned to face her. "Nothing's going wrong. Noah's happy. The job's good. You're—" He trailed off. "I'm what?" "Here." Margaret's breath caught. "Is that a problem?" "No. That's what scares me." She reached over and took his hand. "Caleb Tucker," she said softly. "You have spent your whole life expecting the worst, preparing for loss, building walls to protect yourself from pain. It's kept me alive. It's kept you surviving. That's not the same as living." He looked at their joined hands. Her fingers were soft against his calloused palm. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. "You don't have to stop. You just have to try." She squeezed his hand. "Let yourself hope. Let yourself feel. Let yourself—" "What?" "Love." The word hung in the air between them. Caleb's heart was pounding. 4 years of grief, of fear, of protecting himself from anything that could hurt him, all of it screamed at him to pull away. But he didn't. "I haven't loved anyone since Sarah," he said. "I know. I'm scared. I know that too. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't give you what you deserve?" Margaret stood still, holding his hand, and pulled him to his feet. "Caleb," she said, "you saved my life. You raised a son alone through grief so heavy it stole his voice. You fought an army to protect the people you love. You are more than enough." "Maggie, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for a chance." Her eyes met his, vulnerable and hopeful. "Give us a chance." He looked at her, really looked, at the woman who'd seen something in him worth believing in, who'd given him a future when he had none, who'd stood beside him in the darkness and fought for his son like he was her own. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Okay. I'll try." Her smile could have lit up the whole territory. "That's all I'm asking." He kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated, just a simple natural motion as inevitable as sunrise. Her lips were soft. She tasted like honey and hope. When they pulled apart, she was crying. "Maggie, what's wrong?" "Nothing." She laughed, wiping her eyes. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's finally right." Behind them, a small voice spoke. "Pa." They turned. Noah stood in the doorway, shadow at his side, a grin spreading across his face. "Did you just kiss Miss Maggie?" Caleb felt his face flush. "Well, It's about time." Noah ran forward and hugged them both, his small arms barely reaching around them. "I've been waiting forever." "Forever, huh?" Margaret laughed. "How long is that?" "Since the first night, when you stayed with us." Noah looked up at her with those earnest eyes. "I knew then." "Knew what?" "That you were supposed to be part of our family." Margaret's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "Noah Tucker," she said, her voice thick. "That is the sweetest thing anyone has ever said to me. Is it true? Are you going to be family?" She looked at Caleb. He looked at his son, the boy who'd lost his mother and sister, who'd stopped speaking for 4 years, who'd found his voice again through courage and love and the refusal to give up. This boy deserved a family, and so did Caleb. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I think we are." Noah whooped and hugged them tighter. Shadow barked, tail wagging, and Margaret Shaw, the richest woman in the territory, cried happy tears in the arms of a cowboy who'd saved her life and asked for nothing in return. The wedding was small, just family and close friends gathered in the Silver Falls Chapel on a crisp autumn morning. Pete served as best man. Martha Brennan and her children sat in the front row, honored guests. Noah carried the rings on a velvet pillow, his face solemn with the importance of his task. Margaret wore her mother's dress, simple white lace, elegant and timeless. Caleb wore a new suit, the first he'd ever owned. It felt strange against his skin, too smooth, too refined. But when he saw Margaret walking toward him, everything else faded away. "You came," she whispered as she reached the altar. "You asked." "I did." The preacher spoke the words. They made their vows. Caleb's voice cracked when he said, "I do," and Margaret's eyes shone with tears when she said the same. And when they kissed, the small chapel erupted in cheers. Afterward, at the reception in the main house, Noah climbed onto a chair and raised his glass of apple cider. "I want to make a toast," he announced. The room fell quiet. "When my ma died," Noah said, his young voice carrying clearly, "I stopped talking. I was scared that if I loved anyone else, I'd lose them too." Caleb's throat tightened. "But then Pa saved Miss Maggie in the snow, and she came to our cabin, and she wasn't scared of my silence. She just talked to me, like I was normal, like I mattered." Margaret wiped her eyes. "She gave us a home. She gave us hope. She gave us—" Noah paused, searching for the right word. "She gave us a family again." He raised his glass higher. "To my new ma, and to my pa, and to being a family, finally after everything." The room echoed with the toast. Caleb pulled his son into a hug, unable to speak. Margaret joined them, wrapping her arms around them both. "Thank you," she whispered against Noah's hair, "for letting me in." "Thank you," the boy whispered back, "for staying." Winter came again, as it always did. Snow blanketed Silver Falls, turning the world white and quiet. But inside the main house there was warmth. Caleb sat by the fire, Margaret beside him. Noah on the floor with Shadow. The boy was reading aloud from a book, one of the hundreds in Margaret's library, his voice strong and sure. The adventure began on a cold night. Noah read, when a stranger arrived at the door. Caleb watched his son, marveling at the change. 4 years ago, this boy had been silent, broken, trapped in a grief he couldn't express. Now he was whole, happy, loved. They all were. Margaret leaned against Caleb's shoulder, her hand finding his. "What are you thinking?" she murmured. "About how I got here. And how I almost didn't." She squeezed his hand. "But you did." "Yeah." He looked around the room at his son, his wife, their dog, their home. "I did. Any regrets?" "Just one." "What's that?" "That I wasted so many years being afraid." Margaret turned his face toward hers. "You weren't afraid," she said. "You were surviving. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Fear is standing still. Survival is moving forward, even when it hurts." She kissed his cheek. "You never stopped moving forward, Caleb Tucker. That's why you're here." He thought about that night in the blizzard, the moment he'd seen a dark shape in the snow and made a choice. He could have ridden past, could have told himself it wasn't his problem, that he had his own son to worry about, but he hadn't. He'd stopped. He'd helped. He'd done what was right without expecting anything in return, and that single choice had changed everything. "Pa," he looked at Noah. "Yeah, son. Can we have hot chocolate?" Caleb laughed. "Sure, I'll make some." He stood ruffling Noah's hair as he passed. In the kitchen, heating milk over the stove, he caught his reflection in the window. An older face looked back at him, weathered, scarred, but peaceful. He barely recognized himself. Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Need help?" "I got it." She came anyway, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Happy?" she asked. "Yeah." He covered her hands with his own. "I am." "Good." She pressed her cheek against his back. "Because I am too. Happier than I've ever been. Even with a poor cowboy and his son taking over your house. Especially because of that." She turned him around to face her. "You're not a poor cowboy anymore, Caleb. You're my partner. My husband. The father of our family." "Our family," he repeated. "Ours." He kissed her slow and deep. Behind them, the milk began to bubble. Neither of them noticed. "Pa!" Noah called from the other room. "The hot chocolate's burning." They broke apart laughing. "Duty calls," Margaret said. "Always does." They made the hot chocolate together, 3 cups with extra marshmallows for Noah. Then they returned to the fire, to the warmth, to the family they'd built from ashes and hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside, there was only love. And as Caleb Tucker sat with his wife and son watching the flames dance and listening to Noah read, he finally understood what Margaret had meant. Decency isn't a transaction, it's a choice. He'd made that choice on a frozen trail, saving a stranger without asking her name. And in return, she'd given him everything. A home, a future, a family, a life worth living. The story began with a blizzard and a dying woman in the snow. It ended with a fire and a family gathered around it. And somewhere between the two, a broken cowboy and a lonely cattle queen found what they'd both been searching for. Each other. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Until next time.